I want you to bear with me because I'm going to talk about 30p Lee before I talk about Diane Abbott. And I want you to understand why. You know that I believe, and I think we all know somewhere inside us, that race and class are inextricably intertwined in this country. It is impossible to separate racism from what you could loosely describe as snobbery. And the closest that a white British person will get to understanding or being on the receiving end of the kind of discrimination that people of colour routinely endure would be class-based discrimination. Because I found myself feeling sorry for Lee Anderson in the last 24 hours. Listen, I think the man is hideous. I think he is repellent in many ways, and some of his pronouncements have been obnoxious to the point of performative. But I felt sorry for him for two reasons. I felt sorry for him because he looked so disconsolate at that press conference with the Reflux Party. And he looked so miserable sitting on the backbenches of the House of Commons yesterday next to George Galloway. He had the look of a man who had a sniff of majesty, who got close to... I mean, he must be sitting there thinking, hang on a minute, I was deputy chairman of the Conservative Party 10 minutes ago, and now I'm sitting next to George Galloway as the only MP from a made-up party. And literally like that, poof, it's gone. I think he got high on his own supply. I think he began to think that these people were interested in Lee Anderson rather than interested in a useful vessel that could be used to pretend that some fairly simplistic bigotries were somehow working class. When Rishi Sunak, as a teenager, gave that infamous interview in which he told us that he had working class friends, he has middle class friends, he has working class friends. Well, not actually working class friends. That's where Lee Anderson got hired. He was, if you like, the right shape to fit into a space that the Tory party and GBBs briefly needed. Somebody who could give the impression of speaking for the masses in the way that the editor-in-chief of the Daily Mail or the multi-million leader of the Conservative Party want to believe that the working classes think. So I actually felt sorry for him. And then I felt sorry for him again this morning when I read that he has been slung out of the Reform Club. A club that is dedicated to conservatism. A requirement of membership is that you support the Conservative Party. But I did find myself thinking, when I read that he's already had his letter demanding his resignation, I did find myself thinking that if an old Etonian Tory MP had joined Reflux this week, then would the letter demanding his resignation from that club have arrived quite so quickly? Now, I don't know. But I am allowed to say I don't think so. I think if it was an old Etonian who wore the right tie and had been to school with the committee at the Reform Club, then they would possibly turn a blind eye and sort of, well, he is still one of us, you know, old boy, old Pip, old fruit. He's still one of us, isn't he? So let's just not make a song and dance about it. But they don't. Because he's from Ashfield and used to work down a mine. Do I mean the Carlton Club? I think I mean the Carlton Club. How embarrassing, though. I'm not fully au fait with the Conservative private members club universe. The Carlton... God, some of you are, though. What sort of listeners? How many times do I have to demonstrate that I have a very unique audience for a radio phone? When I started doing this 20 years ago, if I'd misspoken and got the Carlton Club mixed up with the Reform Club, I'm fairly confident that I wouldn't have got 30 messages correcting me within 10 seconds of speaking. Someone's correcting me. Apparently it's called Reform, not Reflux. I prefer Reflux. I think it sort of does exactly what it says on the tin. So I know I'm not expecting you to feel sorry for him, Ian, or indeed anybody else. Troy thinks I've lost it. But it's a human response. It's a human response to a human in pain. Even if they deserve the pain that they're receiving, you are built in two different ways. You can watch someone else suffering and feel nothing, whether they deserve it or not, and you can watch someone else suffering and feel something. So I felt sorry briefly for 30p Lee. Sitting next to George Galloway, I mean, that's enough really to feel sorry for anybody, isn't it? In any circumstances. Sitting next to George Galloway, looking like two rotting potatoes at the back of the fridge. Is the impression that they gave me. So don't think that I'm going to stop taking the mickey out of him or suddenly turn into an admirer or a fan. I'm just telling you that I think he's been a victim of snobbery and I think he's been a victim of exploitation. I think he's been exploited by some fairly unpleasant individuals and institutions and indeed companies. I think he is still being exploited, actually. Everyone's pedantic today. Did I just say very unique? No, you're quite right, Matthew. You cannot have, nothing can be very, one cannot have, to quote, I think, a child prodigy on an early episode of The Day Today, one cannot have gradations of uniqueness. So no, I apologise if I did indeed say very unique. So I mention all of that because the sympathy that I feel for Diane Abbott this morning is of an entirely different order. But I wanted to try, probably in vain, to separate it from party political loyalty. If you've listened to this programme for a long time, you'll know that I shouldn't really have to do that because I was fairly outspoken in my criticism of the last Labour leadership, of which Diane was a key and senior part. So the idea that I am partisan in that context is one that isn't actually fair. It doesn't apply in this case. But just in case you feared it did, my sympathy, though limited for 30p Lee, is authentic. It is sincere, and that's why I've explained it. But the sympathy I feel for Diane Abbott, the sympathy I felt yesterday, is something I've never felt for a politician before. Natasha Clark and I were discussing PMQs yesterday, and someone told me, you told me actually, you texted me, to say that Diane Abbott was trying to catch the Speaker's eye. Diane Abbott was trying to speak. In fact, Sky News have counted it. She stood up 46 times in 35 minutes. Trying to catch Lindsay Hoyle's eye, trying to be called to speak. They call it, I believe, I only learnt this yesterday from Natasha, every day's a school day, bobbing up and down. 46 times in 35 minutes. I'm not sure my knees would stand that, and I'm a bit younger than Diane. But when I left you yesterday, and Natasha said it so blithely that it, I think, crystallised my confidence that of course he's going to call her. Natasha just sort of said, yeah, of course he will. It's bound to happen. We must play the clip when it happens. It didn't cross either of our minds, and she watches Parliament a lot more closely than I do. It didn't cross either of our minds that Diane Abbott wouldn't speak, because everybody else was speaking about her. All the men in the room were talking about Diane Abbott. Keir Starmer was talking about Diane Abbott. Rishi Sunak was talking about Diane Abbott. The men were talking about the woman who had been abused in part for being a woman. And Lindsay Hoyle didn't call her. That's not the topic. The reason I think why Lindsay Hoyle didn't call her is because he's terrified of upsetting people. I think that he survived by the skin of his teeth his appalling mistreatment of the SNP. He may have won some brief support, some brief succour from the Labour Party, from Keir Starmer, who benefited enormously from Hoyle's convention-defying decision to go with a Labour Party amendment in preference to an SNP motion on one of the only days of the year when they get to set the motions. So I think that he took the view that because Diane Abbott doesn't currently have the Labour whip, by not calling her to speak, he's not really going to invite the wrath of the Labour Party because she's not a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party, while if he did call her to speak, it would be pouring oil upon the fires that Rishi Sunak has managed to ignite around himself by refusing to give the £10 million that the misogynistic, racist abuser of Diane Abbott has given to the Conservative Party. So I think Hoyle bottled it. I really do. And I think that in a normal democracy, in a properly functioning parliament, in a place of principle, his job would be in more jeopardy as a consequence of not calling the victim of racism to contribute to a PMQs where the racism directed at her was the main topic of conversation. I think that would put his job in more jeopardy than the SNP decision. But I don't want to upset my Scottish independence supporting listeners. So let's not turn that into a competition. And one thing I've learned over the last few days is that some people find my surprise a little bit silly. And I can't help being surprised. And I know the context of discrimination and racism. I know that the lived experience is constant. I found what Diane said about fear when she just said, as a single woman, I'm already nervous. I don't know why that moved me so much. It really got me right in the feels. And this is a politician about whom I have been able in the past to conjure up some fairly negative thoughts. some unkind thoughts perhaps even. But that really got me. And the reason why you find my surprise silly is because you think this is par for the course. But I still don't. I still think something has changed this week. I still think something has changed this week. I still feel on Thursday that lines I thought had consequences have been crossed without consequences. The fact that Rishi Sunak yesterday defended this money. How many Tory MPs could pony up 200 grand without really noticing? What's the name of the fella that still owns a massive estate in Barbados where his family where his ancestors were slavers? Drax, Richard Drax, Drax. How many of them could pony up? Rishi Sunak could pony up 200 grand without even noticing. I don't know what the rules are, so maybe it wouldn't be the MPs. It would be you only need 50, right? You need 50 donors to pony up 200 grand and you fill the £10 million shaped hole. So you need 50 Tories to ring around. They could do it at the Carlton Club. They could do it over dinner. All you need to do is find 50 Tories who've got a spare £200,000. And then they could say, we don't want this man's money. Because this isn't just about Rishi Sunak anymore. This is about the entire Conservative Party. It's why Chris Patten has spoken out. Chris Patten, a former chairman of the Conservative Party, who has said that it is, and I quote, an open and shut case. You give the money back. But the problem now becomes more than personal. It's not about, we can't afford to. It's about nobody in that party, nobody in a position of influence. Michael Gove touring the studios today, having his last go at pretending that he's foreign secretary. None of them have done enough. None of them have said. None of them have tried to undo the harm that has been done or to address the harm that has been done. All you had to do was say, we don't want this man's money. We're going to fill the hole in the party coffers by ringing around. By passing around the hat, by chipping in. I can't keep doing these sums, but it is 50 people giving 200 grand. So that is 100. No, that is. I told you I wouldn't be able to do the sums. I wouldn't be able to do the sums between. I've probably even got that wrong, but you could get 100 grand, or 50 grand off a bigger number of people, but they haven't done it. You haven't done it. Everyone's correcting me today. I start a theme sometimes when I start accepting corrections early in the show. You think that it's this is the last one. It's from Mike. You got that MP's name a bit wrong, James. His full title is Richard Grosvenor Plunkett Earl Drax. He's just one example of an MP that could plug the hole left by Frank Hester's money and somehow save a little bit of dignity, a little bit of integrity. So that's the question I've got for you today, and I need to make this introduction a little shorter than yesterday's, which broke all records. Have I ever lasted all the way to half past, Keith, on the introduction? How much trouble do I get into if I do? Do I have to refund the advertisers if I go, they're quite right too, just cut me off, mate. I'll never learn. But there are two categories of people listening to this programme that I want to hear from today. People who are surprised. 0345 6060 973. Black people who are surprised. Black people who thought that they lived in a country where this line would have consequences. The man hasn't even apologised. Only Stephen Flynn pointed this out yesterday. Rather splendid comment piece in the Daily Mirror by a young journalist called Serena Richards makes the same point. Yesterday, we were the only people making it. He has not said sorry for being racist or for being sexist. He has said sorry for being rude while denying that he was racist or sexist. They're talking about a black woman making him want to hate all black women while being allowed to claim that he wasn't bringing gender or race into it at all. It's beyond obscene. It's absurd. It's beyond absurd. It's obscene. Get the words the right way around, James. So, are you surprised? It is now 18 minutes after 10 on Thursday, day 3 of this story. Day 3 or day 4? Day 3 of us talking about it. So day 4 of the story, because it broke while we were off air. And I think he's going to get away with it. I think the Tories are going to keep the money. Even as some of the pressure grows, even the Daily Telegraph reports that pressure is growing on the Prime Minister. There was a time when a former Tory chairman telling him to give the money back because it's an open and shut case would have carried rather more weight than it does in the modern environment. And I am shocked. Is that white privilege? Am I just shocked because I don't live with it every day? I don't see it every day. I'm shocked that he's getting away with it. I'm even more shocked that Lindsay Hoyle didn't call Diane Abbott yesterday. And I am shocked that the Tory party itself hasn't sought to lance this boil. Even if Rishi Sunak can't be relied upon to do it, they complain about his weakness, his lack of leadership all the time behind closed doors. There is absolutely nothing stopping anybody coming to the plate and saying, if we really can't afford to give the money back because he's ponied up 20% of our entire donation fund in the last 12 months, we will replace the money because we don't want to. Every single Conservative MP arrives on your doorstep in a general election campaign, propelled in some part by Frank Hester's filthy money. Every single one of you. Or even as you make warm speeches about the need for tolerance and the importance of diversity, even as you opine about the dangers of extremism and the evils of racism, every single one of you turns up on voters' doorsteps in the general election campaign in full knowledge that some of the financial fuel in your political tank has been paid for with Frank Hester's filthy money. Every single one of you. Every single one of you. Whatever your background, whatever your ethnicity, whatever your politics, if you're a Tory and you're knocking on doors come election time, you're doing so with Frank Hester's filthy money. None of them have done anything about it. I know, I get it. Welcome to the world of the black woman, James, says Miss You. I get it, but I think you might still be shocked. You're still able to be shocked, even if you exist in the context of discrimination, even if you live daily with microaggressions and with this. The fact that they're going to get away with it and that Lindsay Hoyle didn't call Diane Abbott yesterday. In a room full of men talking about her, they didn't let the woman speak. I can't believe it, actually. And if you can, tell me why.